On the 14th of March, I drove out to my son's house at 10 minutes past 5 in the morning, the way I have every year on the day the ditch comes up. Because the Vialpando headgate has been opened by a Vialpando on the first call of water since 1867, and I was not going to be the one to break it. It was still full dark and cold enough to see my own breath in the cab. I parked at the end of the drive so the truck would not wake anybody, and I walked up past the propane tank, and the kitchen window was lit, and my son was standing at the sink. Standing. Not braced on the counter, not hauling himself up out of the chair for a second, but standing on both feet with his weight even, drinking a glass of water and looking out at nothing the way a man does at 5 in the morning. Bernabe has not walked since the 20th of October, 2016. He was 25 years old when a truck came across the center line on the Leveta Pass and put him into the borrow ditch upside down, and he has been in a chair for 9 years, and I have paid for every hour of it. My name is Onofre Vialpando. I am 72 years old. Before I tell you what I sold to keep him in that chair, tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight and what the weather is doing there. And hit like and subscribe if you have ever found out that the sacrifice you were proudest of was the exact thing somebody was counting on. One honest note before we begin. This story is a work of fiction. The voice you are hearing and the images you are seeing are AI-assisted. Names, places, and events are invented for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. But the lessons about family, greed, and quiet strength are very real. Now, let us begin. I need you to understand where I am from, because the whole business only makes sense if you do. The San Luis Valley in southern Colorado sits at 7,600 feet between two mountain ranges, and it is a high desert that people have somehow farmed for 180 years. And the only reason anybody has ever been able to live in it is water that comes down out of the Sangre de Cristos in the spring and gets divided up by a system of ditches and priority dates that is older than the state itself. It does not rain here in any useful amount. 7 inches in a good year, and half of that comes in one August afternoon and runs off before the ground can take it. Everything green in this valley is green because somebody put water on it on purpose through a ditch some family dug by hand 150 years ago. And everything brown is brown because their claim was not old enough. You can stand on the county road and see the line where one man's water stops and another man's dust begins, straight as a fence. And that line is a date on a piece of paper filed in a courthouse in the 1800s. My family's decree on the Vialpando ditch is dated the 18th of April, 1867. In this valley, that is not a piece of paper. That is the difference between a place that gets water in a dry year and a place that stands at the fence watching a neighbor get it. And there have been a great many more dry years than wet ones in my lifetime. A senior right like ours is worth more than the land it runs on, more than the house, more than every other thing a family here owns put together. Everybody in 6 counties knows what everybody else's priority date is, the way people in other parts of the country know what car you drive. When somebody dies here, the second question, after how the family is holding up, is what happens to the water. And nobody thinks that is a cold thing to ask, because the water is the family. 4 generations of it, poured out on the same ground every spring, until the ground and the name are the same thing. I spent 34 years as a water commissioner for Division 3, which everybody here calls a ditch rider. From 1979 until 2013, I drove this valley with a staff gauge and a current meter and a book, up and down 200 miles of ditch from ice out in April until the call came off in October. And my entire job, every single day of it, came down to one thing. I found out who was actually taking what. Not what a man told me he was taking, not what his decree entitled him to take. What was physically going through that headgate at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 6th of July, measured by me, with my own 2 hands, in a book with my initials at the bottom of the page. That is the whole trade. A man can hand you a decree that says he is entitled to 4 cubic feet a second, and the decree can be 100 years old and perfectly legal, and it does not mean one thing about what is running down his ditch at that moment. And the only way to know is to go and put the meter in the water yourself. I have shut off men in front of their own families. I have stood in a farmyard in August with a wife and 3 children watching from the porch and told a man that his corn was going to burn because his date was junior to the man downstream, and that there was nothing in it I could change, and that if he opened that headgate again after I left, I would have the sheriff out. I have testified in water court 14 times and been taken apart by attorneys who were paid more for one morning than I made in a season. I have been threatened at a headgate in the dark by a man I went to grade school with, who put his hand on a shovel and thought better of it. And I have been offered money twice, once in an envelope left on the seat of my truck, and once out loud at a cafe in Center. And in 34 years, I never wrote a number in that book that I had not read off a gauge with my own eyes. That was not virtue. I want to be honest that it was not virtue. It was only the way the job works, because the whole system, the entire 150-year-old machine of it, rests on the idea that one man will get out of his truck in the cold and go and look. And then my son rolled a truck on the Levita Pass, and for 9 years after that, I did not measure one single thing. Delphina died in the spring of 2020, a stroke in the front room on a Tuesday afternoon in April, 42 years married. She was standing at the window watching for the mail when it took her, and I was out at the corrals, and by the time I came in, she was on the floor and gone. She was the one who kept the ditch company books and remembered everybody's birthday and told me when I was being too hard on people. After she was gone, it was me alone on the home place, and Benny and Karina and the 2 children in the house on the county road that I bought for them in 2017 so my son could have a ramp and a wide hallway and a bathroom he could actually use. The house was 3 miles from mine, close enough that I could see their yard light from my kitchen window at night, and for 9 years I looked at it every single evening before I went to bed and thought, well, at least he is close. At least I can see the light. A man alone in a house will make a whole religion out of a yard light 3 miles off. My daughter-in-law is 36. Karina is a home infusion nurse for an outfit in Alamosa, and she is good at it. And for 9 years, she managed every part of my son's care. The equipment, and the appointments, and the billing, and the insurance, and the arguing with people on telephones for 2 hours at a time, all of it. And I was grateful to her for that, the way you are grateful for weather you did not have to stand out in. I said so publicly. I said at the Ditch Company annual meeting one January, in front of 40 people in a cold Grange hall with the coffee going bitter on the burner, that my son had been blessed with a wife who did not flinch. And I meant every word of it when I said it. And I would like that on the record before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a man who was looking for the worst in her. I was a man who had decided, without ever saying it to myself, that she had taken a hard thing off my hands and that I owed her a debt for it. And a debt is a comfortable thing to owe. It stops you asking questions. Now, I will tell you about the water, and I want to do it plainly and without making it sound like anything noble, because it was not noble in the end. It was only what I did. In the spring of 2017, the first bills came for the modifications on that house, the ramp and the lift and the doorways and the roll-in shower and the widened jams, and it came to $91,000. Insurance covered a piece of it, and the settlement had not come through yet, and the rest of it was mine. So I sold 60 acre-feet of 1867 priority to a mutual ditch company over in Rio Grande County, and I signed the deed in a lawyer's office in Monte Vista on a Thursday and did not read past the second page. And I drove home feeling that I had done a father's job. That is the thing nobody tells you about giving away the most valuable thing your family owns. It does not feel like loss. It feels like love. It feels like exactly the thing you are supposed to be doing. And that feeling is the trap. And I walked into it with my eyes open and my chest full of something I mistook for pride. In 2018, it was the van, the one with the lift in the back, and the therapy the insurance would not cover, and the home health hours. And I sold 80 more acre-feet to cover it. In 2020, the year his mother died, it was a specialist in Denver and 11 trips over that pass in the winter, and I sold 100. 2022, 90. 2023, 70. 2024, 60. 460 acre-feet of the oldest water in this stretch of the valley, sold off in 6 pieces across 8 years. And I took whatever the first buyer offered every single time, because I never once had the time or the stomach to wait for a better price. That is a thing I would have caught in 11 seconds if it had been anybody else's family. I spent 34 years watching men get skinned on water sales because they were desperate and in a hurry. And I would sit in my truck afterward and shake my head at them. And then I did the exact same thing 6 times running and told myself each time that it was different because it was for my boy. My great-grandfather, Onofre Vialpando, dug that ditch with a scraper and a mule team and 2 of his brothers, and it took them 3 seasons. And the middle brother died of a fever the second winter and is buried up on the hill above the head of the ditch, where you can see the whole run of it. My father defended that decree in water court twice, in 1961 and again in 1974. And the second time, he mortgaged the hayground to pay the lawyer and did not tell my mother until it was finished, and she did not speak to him for a week, and then she forgave him because he had saved the water. That is what the water was in my family. It was the thing you mortgaged the ground to defend. It was the thing worth not speaking to your husband over, and then worth forgiving him for. And I sold 3/4 of it out from under 158 years of my own people. And I did it without hesitating once. And I want to be very clear about something. I would have sold the last 180 acre-feet and the ground under my own feet and the house I was born in if any human being on this earth had told me it would put my son back up on his legs. That is not a confession. It is just the size of the thing. And you cannot understand what happened next unless you understand that I was not tricked into any of it. Nobody had to work on me. I was standing there the whole 9 years with the pen already out of my pocket. And that is the part I have to live with. So that is the man who was standing outside that kitchen window at 10 minutes past 5 in the morning on the 14th of March. Not a man who was tricked. A man who had already given everything and was glad of it. And I did not go inside that morning. And I want to be honest that this was not any kind of strategy, not in that moment, because I could not make my legs carry me up those 3 steps. I stood in the dark next to the propane tank in 22 degrees for what the clock in my truck later told me was 19 minutes. And I watched. I watched my son fill that glass a second time. I watched him scratch the back of his neck and roll his shoulder the way he has done since he was a boy at the supper table. I watched him cross that kitchen and set the glass in the drainer and come back. And the thing that finished me, standing out there with the cold coming up through my boots, was not that he could walk. It was that he was not thinking about it. He was not concentrating. That is the detail I keep coming back to a year later. A man who has taught himself to walk again in secret, a man doing a hard and hidden thing, walks the way you walk on ice, with his whole mind in his feet. My son was walking across a kitchen at 5 in the morning, thinking about nothing at all, the way you do, the way a man does when his body is just his body and has been for years. He reached up into the cupboard without looking. He shifted his weight to open the drawer. It was not therapy, and it was not practice, and it was not a miracle he was building up to show me on Christmas morning. It was just a Tuesday, and he was just a man in his own kitchen, and he had been that man for a long, long time. Then the hall light came on down the corridor, and he sat down into the chair by the doorway in one easy, unhurried motion, like a man lowering himself into a restaurant booth. And he rolled out of the room, and I stood in the dark and understood that the chair was a costume he put on when he heard someone coming. Then I walked back to my truck, and I drove to the head gate, and I opened it, because the ditch does not care what has just happened to you, and the water comes when it comes. There were 4 men waiting at the Vialpando crossing to see the first call go through, the way there always are on that morning, Delbert Trujillo among them with his thermos, and one of them asked me if I was all right, and I said I had not slept, which was true, and was also a lie, and they let it go, the way men here let things go. I fitted the wheel, and I turned it, and it went up rough for the first quarter turn, the way it always has, and then it came easy, and I watched the water come down the ditch under the county road bridge, brown and cold and carrying last year's cottonwood leaves. And I stood there with my hands in my pockets, and I could not have told you one single thing about what I was looking at. 34 years I read that water like a page, and that morning it was just noise in a ditch. For 11 days after that, I did nothing at all, and I need to account for those 11 days honestly, because a man who tells you he went straight from the window to the truth is lying to you. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront anybody. I did not tell one living soul, not Delbert, not my sister down in Antonito, nobody. I sat out on the home place, and I ran it over and over, the way you run a bad measurement, which is that when a number does not make sense, the first thing a careful man does is assume his own instrument is wrong and check it 4 more times before he goes accusing the water of anything. I told myself I had seen it in the dark, through a window, at 72 years of age, with eyes that need good light now. I told myself the mind plays tricks at 5 in the morning on no sleep. I told myself there are recoveries, that incomplete injuries do surprising things years out, and no doctor can tell you why. That maybe the feeling had come back, and he had not wanted to raise my hopes until he was sure. I told myself he had been working at it in secret and was building up to some day he had picked out, a birthday or a Christmas or the anniversary of the wreck, and that if I walked in there now and said what I had seen, I would be stealing that from him, robbing my own son of the one good morning he had been saving. That is how far a man will go to keep from doing the arithmetic. And the entire time, underneath every one of those kind and reasonable stories, I was running the other arithmetic, the one with 460 acre-feet in it, and 8 years, and 6 deeds, and a boy in a chair. And I could not make myself carry it out to the end. I would get about 3 steps into it, to the place where the numbers turned and pointed at something, and I would stand up out of my chair and go outside and find a thing to do with my hands, a gate to fix that did not need fixing, until the cold drove me back in and I could pretend I had never started. On the 25th of March, I picked up Marisol from school, which I do most Tuesdays. She is 13. She is the older of the two, and she is a serious child. The kind who reads the whole sign and then reads the back of it. The kind who, at 6 years old, corrected the priest. We were about 4 miles out of town on the county road with the mountains going pink on the left, and she had not said a word since she got in, which is not like her at all. And I asked her if she was all right. She looked out that window for about 1/4 of a mile, long enough that I thought she had not heard me. And then she said, "Grandpa, how much did the water cost?" I said, "What do you mean, Mika?" And she said, "The water you sold. For Dad. How much was it worth?" And there was something in the flatness of how she said it, the way a person says a thing they have carried up a long hill, that made me take my foot off the gas. I pulled that truck onto the shoulder and put it in park, and the dust we had been raising caught up and drifted past the windshield. And my granddaughter sat there with her backpack held in both arms against her chest like a shield. And she told me, in the flat, careful voice a child uses when they have rehearsed a thing 100 times alone, that her father had been walking around that house for about 4 years, and that she had known for 2 of them, and that she had not told me. She found out when she was 11. She got up in the night for a glass of water, and her father was standing in the hallway on his own 2 feet with a laundry basket balanced on his hip. She said he saw her, and he did not run and he did not lie. He just sat straight down on the floor of that hallway with the laundry spilling around him, and put his face in his hands and cried. And then he got up and made her cocoa and explained it to her at the kitchen table. And then he asked her not to tell. 11 years old, at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, being asked by her own father to hold the thing that was quietly ruining her grandfather. So I asked her the only question I had, and it was not why he did it, because I already knew that answer. I could feel it forming in the cold pit of my stomach. I asked her why she had not come to me, and Onofre Vialpando looked at me across the bench seat of that truck with the mountains going dark behind her and said the sentence I am going to be carrying when they put me in the ground next to her grandmother. She said, "Because you already sold the water." She said, "If I told you, then you would know you sold it for nothing." And she started to cry then, finally, the way you cry when you have put a thing down after carrying it too far. And I put my arm around her across that bench seat, and I did not say it was all right, because it was not. And she was old enough to know I would be lying, and she deserved better from me than a lie in a truck on the shoulder of a county road. My granddaughter carried that by herself for 2 years, at 11 and 12 and 13 years old, in that house, at that table, 3 miles from my yard light, every single day, to keep her grandfather from having to do the subtraction. She had done the same arithmetic I could not make myself finish, done it as a child, and she had come to the same answer, and she had decided, alone, that it was kinder to let me keep giving away my family's water than to make me know what I was giving it away for. That is the kind of thing that is done to children in houses where the grown people have made a certain kind of arrangement. Nobody sat her down and recruited her. She simply understood the shape of the thing she was standing in, the way children always do, and she chose the person she thought she could protect. And the person she chose was me. I did not go home that afternoon. I dropped her at her mother's and said goodnight in the driveway like it was any Tuesday. And I watched her go up the walk, and I watched the door close. And then I drove straight into Alamosa and sat in the parking lot outside the office of a water attorney named Isabel Quintana until she came out at 6 o'clock in her coat with her keys in her hand. I got out of the truck and said her name, and she looked at my face under the parking lot light. And whatever was in it made her turn around and unlock the door and put the lights back on and set her bag down. And I stood in her waiting room with my hat in my hands and told her the whole thing. And here is what it actually was. And I want to say plainly that it was nothing like what I had spent 11 days building in my head. Nobody was drugging my son. There was no crooked doctor and no compound in a paper cup and no poison anywhere in this story. There was a structured settlement. The trucking company's insurer settled in 2018, and it did not pay out in a lump. It pays a monthly annuity with a catastrophic care rider on top of it, and together those come to a little over $9,200 a month, and it is payable for the rest of his life, and every dollar of it is contingent on continued total permanent disability with a medical recertification every 24 months. That is not unusual, and it is not a trap, and the insurer was not doing one thing wrong. That is simply how a great many of these are written, because the money is supposed to replace a lifetime of work that the injury took away. And if the injury heals, the reason for the money heals with it. And Bernabe's feelings started coming back in the fall of 2021, which happens with an incomplete injury sometimes, years out. And no physician alive can tell you why one man gets it back and the next one lies in a bed for 40 years. It just came back to him, a little at a time. A warmth, and then a twitch, and then a step, the way the water comes back to a dry ditch in April. By the spring of 2022, he could stand. By that summer, he could cross a room. And he told his wife, and he did not tell his father, and he did not tell his physician, and he did not tell the insurance company. Karina did the arithmetic in about a day, and I have to give her this much, cold as it is to say, she did it correctly. $9,200 a month for life, guaranteed, indexed to inflation, against a 31-year-old man with a high school diploma, no trade, 6 years out of any workforce, a wife and 2 children, in a county where the median household income does not reach $45,000 a year. And if he recovers, all of that stops, every dollar of it. And there is a look-back provision in that agreement that lets the company come after what it has already paid. So she sat my son down at the kitchen table, where his daughter would later be asked to keep the secret, and she laid every bit of that out, the numbers and the years and the risk. And she did not have to twist his arm, and she did not have to threaten him. She just showed him the arithmetic. And he said yes. That was 3.5 years before I stood outside that window. There was a recertification in 2023, and he passed it. And I need you to understand how he passed it, because it is the hinge of the whole thing. A disability recertification for an injury like his is not a machine you plug a man into that reads out the truth. It is a physiatrist in an office, and it depends almost entirely on what the patient reports and what the patient will demonstrate. The doctor asks you to try to move, and you try, or you do not, and there is no dial anywhere in that room that tells him you are lying. My son sat in that chair in a clinic in Pueblo, in front of a good and careful doctor who had no reason on earth to doubt him, and when he was asked to try, he did not try. And he did it convincingly, because he had been doing it for years. And the doctor wrote down exactly what he honestly saw, which was a man who could not move his legs. And the whole time, I kept selling water. That is the part I could not get around in Isabel Quintana's office at 9 o'clock at night with the coffee gone cold, and cannot get around now, a year later, sitting here telling it. It was not a scheme that required me. I was never the target of anything, not at the start. In the beginning, I was only a man who kept turning up with money, who never once had to be asked twice, and after a while, a father selling off irreplaceable senior water to pay for a disability that no longer existed became one of the ordinary background facts of that household, like the propane bill, or the school calendar, or the yard light I watched from 3 miles off. Nobody sat in that kitchen and plotted against me. I want to be fair about that, because it would almost be easier if they had. If I could point to a night when they decided to rob the old man, they simply let me keep doing the thing I was already doing, and let me keep feeling like a good father while I did it. And every year I did it, it got harder for anybody in that house to say a word, because saying it would have meant saying it about the year before, too, and the year before that, and about the funeral, and about a little girl asked to keep a secret. By the third year, I was not really a person in that arrangement any longer. I was a source. That is a thing that happens to men my age inside their own families more often than anybody wants to talk about. And it does not require a villain to get started. It only requires that a man be generous and proud of his generosity and unwilling to look, and that the people around him find it easier not to stop him than to stop him. I had spent 34 years knowing that the whole system fails the moment one man decides not to go and look, and I had become that man in my own house, and I had not even noticed, because not looking felt exactly like love. Then Isabel asked me the question that turned the whole thing over. She had been quiet for a long while, taking notes in a hand I could not read, and she set her pen down and asked me who held the ditch shares now. I said I did, 180 acre-feet and the home place, everything that was left. And she asked whether Karina knew what that was worth, and I said she had heard me say the number out loud at a kitchen table more than once, because in this valley, the number is just something you say, the way you say the weather. Isabel took her glasses off and set them on the desk, and rubbed the bridge of her nose. And she said she wanted to check one thing before I drove home, and she got into the county records and the district court docket while I sat there with my hands on my knees looking at a framed photograph of the Rio Grande on her wall. And at about 20 minutes to 9, she stopped typing, and she turned her monitor around to face me without saying anything. On the 3rd of March of this year, 11 days before I stood outside that kitchen window in the cold, Onofre Vialpando had filed a petition in Alamosa County District Court for the appointment of a conservator over the estate of Onofre Vialpando, alleging that I was no longer able to manage my property and business affairs. I read the caption with my own name on it, and then I read the numbered paragraphs, and then I got to the exhibit list, and I had to put my head down on that woman's desk with my forehead against the cool wood, because I understood what she had built before I even reached the bottom of the page. It was not a lie. That is what took the strength out of my arms. It was not a single false word. Exhibit A was the 2017 water sale. Exhibit B was 2018, then 2020, 2022, 2023, 2024. 6 deeds, each one certified, each one stamped by the county clerk, each one absolutely real. 460 acre-feet of 1867 priority water alienated over 8 years. Every single one of them at a price below what that water was fetching in this valley in the year it sold. Because I never waited, and never shopped it, and never once cared what I got. And the petition said, in that careful, bloodless language those documents are written in, that the respondent has systematically alienated irreplaceable senior water rights at substantially below market value in a pattern consistent with diminished capacity, and that the respondent's remaining holdings, meaning the last 180 acre-feet and the home place, are at imminent risk of similar dissipation and require the protection of a conservator. Every good thing I had done for that boy, every acre-foot I had poured out of my own veins to keep him comfortable, she had stacked in a folder and labeled as proof that I had lost my mind. I have thought about the elegance of it more than I would like to admit to you. She did not have to forge one document. She did not have to plant anything in my house or put anything in my coffee or write a single false word anywhere in that petition. She took 9 years of a father emptying himself out for his son, laid it out in chronological order with the clerk's stamps in the corner, and put it in front of a busy district judge in a rural county who has 40 of these on his docket. And a stack like that looks exactly like what she said it was. It looks like an old man being taken. It looks like a man in decline giving away the crown jewels of his family for a song, over and over, faster each year. And the terrible thing, the thing I could not stop turning over on that desk, is that from the outside, it is nearly impossible to tell the difference between a father ruined by love and an old man ruined by his own failing mind. The deeds look the same. The prices look the same. The only thing that separates the two stories is the reason. And the reason was locked in a boy's legs 3 miles away. Because that was the load-bearing piece of the whole thing, the one beam the entire structure rested on. The only thing her petition needed, the single fact that turned 6 acts of love into 6 symptoms of dementia, was for nobody on this earth to ever say out loud that the son could walk. The moment that sentence exists in a courtroom, the moment a doctor or a witness or a 13-year-old girl says it, those 6 deeds stop being symptoms of anything and turn back into what they were, which is a father's sacrifice. And the person who looks impaired stops being me and starts being the 2 people who watched me do it and said nothing. That is why my granddaughter's silence was worth more to my daughter-in-law than any forged paper could ever have been. A forged paper can be exposed. A child's silence just has to be maintained. And a child can be given every reason in the world to maintain it, starting with love of her grandfather. Isabel Quintana is 54 years old, and she does water law and nothing else. And she told me that night, gently, that she was not the right person to run this and was not going to pretend to be. What I had, she said, was not a water case, and it was not really even a fraud case yet. What I had was a shape, and to turn a shape into something a court would act on, I needed a certain kind of person. And she made a phone call the next morning and put me in front of a man named Otis Hakala, who does special investigations for the insurer's outside counsel out of a small office in Alamosa with nothing on the walls. Otis is about 60, quiet, with the flattest way of talking I have ever heard. And the reason Isabel sent me to him, instead of running at the family herself, was one sentence she said in her office that night that I have kept. She said, "Onofre, you do not want to be the plaintiff in this thing. You want to be the witness. The plaintiff is angry, and the plaintiff is grieving, and the plaintiff is the man's father. And the plaintiff like that, a good defense attorney can turn into the villain in an afternoon. The witness just tells the truth in the right order and lets the paper do the rest." 2 different people over the following month suggested that I take a camera out to that county road at 5 in the morning and get it on film, my son walking across his own kitchen, and both times I said no. And at the time, I could not have told you exactly why. I can now. 34 years. I never once wrote down a number I had not read off a gauge myself, and I was not going to spend the end of my life crouched in a borrowed ditch across the road from my own son's house, in the dark, taking a photograph of my own child through a window like a man photographing a cheating spouse. There is a line, and I found it there, standing at the edge of that decision, and I would not cross it. What I did instead was the only thing I actually know how to do, which is tell the truth in an order that I chose, and let the water find its own level. On the 8th of April, we answered the conservatorship petition, and we did not answer it with a denial, because a denial is a small thing, and this was not going to be one small. Isabel filed a verified response in which I stated under oath the amount and priority date of every acre-foot I had ever sold, the price of each sale, the exact date of each sale, and the precise purpose of every single dollar. The purpose was the care and support of my son Onofre Vialpando, who has been certified as totally and permanently disabled since 2017. Attached to it was the settlement agreement, the recertification schedule, and 9 years of my own bank records, unredacted, every page, every check. That document did not accuse one single person of anything. It did not use the word walk. It simply said, "Here is precisely why I sold it, and here is the man I sold it for, and here is the certification that says that man cannot stand, and I would respectfully ask this court to look very carefully at both of those things at the same time, and notice that they cannot both be true." Isabel called it the quietest filing she had ever put her name to. It just laid two facts side by side and stepped back. Otis Hakala's people worked it for 11 weeks, and they did not follow my son around either, which surprised me until I understood how this kind of thing actually falls. They did something a great deal duller than a camera in a bush, and duller is what breaks these open. They pulled the pharmacy record, because a man who has been paralyzed below the waist for 9 years fills certain prescriptions constantly and forever, the ones that manage what a body does when it cannot feel itself. And Onofre had not filled a single one of them since March of 2022. They pulled the durable medical equipment claims because a pressure relief cushion for a man with no sensation gets replaced on a fixed schedule, since if it is not, that man ends up in a hospital with a wound that takes a year to close, and my son's had not been replaced in 3 years. Because my son did not need it, and could not have explained a wound he was never going to get. They pulled 4 years of the physiatrist's own chart notes and found the phrase, "patient reports no change," written in 11 consecutive visits, which is not a thing that happens to a real injured body over 4 years, because a real body always changes. It gets a little better or a little worse. It has a good winter and a bad spring. And a chart that says no change 11 times in a row is not the record of a patient. It is the record of a performance. And in the end, none of it was even necessary, because on the 19th of June, in a conference room in Alamosa, Otis Hakala sat down across from Karina at her own deposition and slid the recertification file across the table and asked her 7 questions, slow and flat. And my son's attorney asked for a recess after the 4th one. There was no shouting, and there was no dramatic moment. There was just a woman in a conference room saying, quietly, that she would like to speak with counsel, and a court reporter noting the time on the record. And the whole 9 years turning over like a truck on a mountain pass. Benny came out to the home place by himself on the 22nd of June, 3 days after the deposition. He parked at the end of the drive, in the same spot where I had parked in the dark in March, and he sat in that truck a long while with the engine ticking as it cooled. And then he got out and walked across my yard and up my 3 steps. And it was the first time I had seen my son walk toward me in 9 years. I want to be able to tell you that some part of that was joy, that some old animal piece of a father's heart leapt up at the sight of his boy on his own 2 legs. It did not. I stood in my doorway and watched my son walk and felt nothing but a great gray tiredness. Because every step he took was a step he could have taken toward me any day for 4 years, and had chosen not to. He stood on my porch and could not get his eyes up off the boards. And he said, "Dad." And I said, "Sit down, mijo." And he sat. He talked for about 2 hours, and he did not blame her one time. And that is the single thing I will give my son, and I will give it to him honestly. He said she had laid it all out, and she had been right about every part of it, right about the money and the years and the risk, and that he had said yes, and that he had said yes again every single day since, which is a different and much worse thing than saying it once. He said he had planned to tell me maybe 11 times and had gotten as far as my driveway twice and turned around both times. And the year he could not get past, the one that broke his voice when he came to it, was 2020, because that spring I sold 100 acre-feet to cover what his mother's last 3 weeks in the Denver hospital had cost. And he was already walking around his own bedroom at night by then, and he stood beside me in the funeral home in Alamosa on his own 2 legs inside a wheelchair, while I signed the papers that gave away 100 acre-feet of his great-great-grandfather's water to bury his mother. And he said nothing. Then he looked up from the boards for the first time, and he said, "I did not know Mari knew." He knew she had seen him that once in the hallway. He did not know she had been carrying it for 2 years. And I watched that land on him, the weight of what had been done to his own daughter. And I did not soften it for him, because it was true, and he had made it true. Karina took 4 years on the fraud, and it would have been considerably less, except that in July, after she understood exactly what was coming, she moved to have the conservatorship heard on an emergency basis to get me declared incompetent before the deposition testimony could be entered. And that gamble is what turned a civil insurance matter into something the district attorney wanted his name on. Because it looked like exactly what it was, an attempt to silence a witness by having him declared mad. Bernabe pleaded and took 18 months and will do about 11 of them at the facility in Buena Vista. The insurer's claim for everything paid out after March of 2022 came to $401,000, and there is a judgment for it. And between the two of them, they will not finish paying that in my lifetime. The conservatorship petition was dismissed on the 9th of July in a hearing that lasted 9 minutes, and the order says only that the evidence does not support a finding of diminished capacity, and that the respondent's asset dispositions are fully accounted for and were made for a purpose the respondent has explained under oath. It does not say anywhere that the purpose was love or that it was betrayed. A court order is not the place where a thing like that gets said. It just closes the file. I did not get the water back, and I want to be very clear about that, because people hear a story like this and expect there to be a part at the end where the water comes home, where the wrong is undone, and the ditch runs full again. There is no such part. Those 6 decrees have been adjudicated and changed of use, and they are running through other men's headgates in Rio Grande and Conejos counties right now, on ground I can drive past on a Sunday, watering another family's alfalfa. And 460 acre-feet of 1867 priority does not exist twice in this world and does not come home. My great-grandfather's ditch carries 180 acre-feet now, and that is what this family has, and that is what it will have when I am gone. And I did that, not Karina, not the wreck, not the insurer. I signed every one of those deeds with my own hand, and no court order gives that back. Marisol and Tavo live with me on the home place now. That took until October, and it took Isabel and a guardian ad litem and 2 hearings, and it is the only part of this entire business that I fought for like a younger man, tooth and claw, rather than simply telling the truth about and letting the paper decide. Marisol is 14 now. She is a freshman at Alamosa High. She is taking algebra, and she is very good at it, better than good, and her teacher called me to say so. Tavo is 9, and he does not understand more than a piece of what happened, and I am in no hurry at all for him to understand the rest of it, and there may be years yet before I have to find the words. In May, I did the one thing in all of this that I am completely certain was right, and I did it in Isabel's office on a Thursday afternoon, and it cost $11,000, and I would have paid 10 times that. I put the remaining 180 acre-feet and the ditch shares and the home place into an irrevocable trust, with the 2 children as the beneficiaries and a bank in Denver as the trustee, on terms that say that the water may not be sold, may not be leased out of the ditch, and may not be changed of use for any purpose by anybody ever, including me, especially including me. What that means in plain terms is that if I get old and frightened and somebody I love is sitting in front of me in a chair, in a hospital, in a courtroom, needing something, and I reach for the pen, there will be no pen. I cannot do the thing I have already done 6 times. And that, and only that, is why I did it. Because I know now exactly what kind of man I am. And what I am is a man who will sell anything on this earth. The water, the ground, the house he was born in, the last thing his great-grandfather dug out of the desert with a mule. If you sit his son in a chair in front of him, and let him believe he is helping. I have taken that pen away from my own hand for good, because I could not be trusted with it, and a man who can admit that is at least halfway to being safe. On the 14th of March of this year, 1 year to the week after I stood in the dark outside that window, I drove out to the Vialpando headgate for the first call of water with Marisol on the seat beside me, because she asked to come. The morning was cold and clear, and the mountains were still white to the base, and I showed her the staff gauge and how to read it against the light, where the paint has worn off the 6-inch mark, so you have to know it is there. And I showed her the lock and the wheel, and how the gate sticks for the first quarter turn before it comes easy. And then I stood back, and I let her turn it. She had to put her whole weight on it, and it went up rough, and then it came easy under her hands. And 159 years of this family went down that ditch under my granddaughter's grip, and neither one of us said one word about any of it, because there was nothing that needed saying. And she is the kind of child who knows it. This is a work of fiction, and the voice you have been listening to is not a living man. But the lesson under it is as real as cold water and old paper. For 34 years, I drove this valley and told every farmer in 6 counties that the only number that counts is the one you read off the gauge with your own eyes. I shut off men I had known since grade school on the strength of a measurement I took at 11 in the morning, and I never accepted a man's word about his own headgate, not because they were liars, but because a man standing in his own ditch genuinely cannot see it. The sun is on the water, and the hope is in his chest, and he sees what he needs to see. And then I came home, and for 9 years I never took one reading in my own family. I never asked my son's physician a single question. I never read the settlement agreement I was pouring my family's water into. I never once went and stood in the room and watched. I paid, and paying felt like doing something. And it is not. It is the opposite of doing something. It is the thing a man does instead of looking. So go and stand in the ditch. Read the gauge yourself, even when it is your own house, especially when it is your own house, and most of all, when what you might find out would mean that something you already gave up was given up for nothing. Because that is the exact reading nobody wants to take, and it is the only one that was ever going to matter. My name is Onofre Vialpando, and they buried the wrong man.